Hi everyone, it's Miss Brenner. I'm here to go over your Week 9 agenda and expectations. I hope you're all doing well and staying happy and healthy. This week we are going to continue to move forward with our monster notes and to talk about the horror genre. So students will be able to take literary notes to help support their understanding of literary lenses and begin reading stories of the horror genre. Students will apply their understanding of the literary lenses and the monster types to analyze the deeper meaning of these stories. As far as what students will know the literary terms, literary lens definitions, elements of plot, and monster types. Students will be able to identify characters based on plot moments, reference characters by name, identify and analyze characters with bias and empathy, and use lenses to analyze text. As far as essential questions, how can literary elements be analyzed through a specific lens to create meaning? How can characters be broken down to fit a deeper, more complex purpose? And how does the author create suspense, and why does this frighten us as readers? So we will be looking through some different stories by Stephen King this week. Maybe you've heard of him. He's a pretty well-known author. So as we go into the Week 9 folder, you'll see that there's a pink folder at the top that says About the Author. In that folder there is a video clip from YouTube. If you are somebody who is uncomfortable with the horror genre, I would just listen to the audio of the video. The video just has pictures going through in the background that are from different Stephen King movies that are very popular. So therefore, it isn't relevant to what the person is saying, but it might make you uncomfortable if you already are not a fan of the horror genre. So I would just listen to what the person is saying. If you do like the horror genre, the video is very interesting and entertaining. It tells us about Stephen King. It tells us about his process of writing. If you enjoy writing and enjoy the horror genre, I highly recommend looking into him further. He is a very interesting author and very inspiring. Then in the Activity 1 folder, we have The Graveyard Shift, which is by Stephen King. This is in one of his first collections of short stories called Night Shift. So we are going to be starting off with part 1 through Edpuzzle, and then we have a discussion post. Our first discussion post for Graveyard Shift is, what is your interpretation of the short story Graveyard Shift by Stephen King from a literary lens perspective? We're going to either use new, critical, gender, classist, or psychological. What elements of the story do you see in connection to this lens that support your interpretation? You may use more than one. So by all means, if you want to use examples that are from more than one to create a combination, that is fine. Use 3 examples from the story to support your interpretation of Graveyard Shift through a literary lens of your choice. This needs to be a minimum of 15 sentences, and then you're going to comment on one other student's discussion post about their interpretation of the story. Then we are in Activity 2. And we are looking at part 2 of Graveyard Shift with a part 2 discussion. What form of monster, so what kind of monster, or a combination between the 3 forms discussed in the notes, do you believe is occurring within the short story Graveyard Shift by Stephen King? Explain your reasoning using evidence from the text. You need to use 3 examples from the story to support your interpretation of monster or monsters in Graveyard Shift. This is a minimum of 15 sentences, and you're going to comment on one other student's discussion post about their interpretation of the story. Graveyard Shift, overall, has a tone of tension, and it is an adult story. So there are moments of adult language. If that makes you uncomfortable, please contact me, and I will find you a different story. For creative writing for this week, we are on Week 9, and our creative options are to write a story about waiting, but don't reveal what's being waited for until the very end. Write the origin story of a person who goes on to achieve great things. Write a story about community, or write a story that ends by circling back to the beginning. So those are our different writing prompt options. Once again, you still have this option to do the weekly writing competition website, if you would prefer to use a writing prompt from them and to enter the competition. Alrighty, Activity 3. You have 2 options of Stephen King short stories to read for Activity 3. There is Gray Matter, which is a short story that does involve some adult language. However, if you are somebody that doesn't like the horror genre, I would recommend Gray Matter. It's science fiction and monster horror blended, and it's not quite as gruesome as some of the other Stephen King stories. While Children of the Corn, maybe you've heard of the movie before, the story is different because it is a short story in comparison to like a 2-hour movie. But Children of the Corn is a lot more gruesome in comparison to Gray Matter. So if you are a big fan of the horror genre, I do highly recommend reading this short story by Stephen King. It is very well written. It contains a lot less adult language than a lot of his other stories. And overall, it's just a very interesting monster story. So you're going to choose between those two. And if for some reason they make you uncomfortable, you don't want to read horror, please contact me. And we'll have a talk about it, and we'll see if we can find you something else that might meet your interests a little bit better. We then have a worksheet for Gray Matter or Children of the Corn, depending upon which one you read. We are looking at the different types of monsters in this chart. So we are looking for quotes or paraphrased information from the stories that you feel support a type of monster that you believe is existing in one of those two stories. I would recommend looking for these examples as you are reading, because there may be more than one monster in the story. There might be more than one connection that you make to a monster type. You might think it's a blend of monster types. So I would recommend that you look for the different monster types as you are reading, and then ask yourself, how does this monster create suspense in the story? Explain the impact this monster has on the reader's connection to the characters / plot of the story. So why Stephen King may have chosen to create a monster that exists in this story in this manner. The second part is looking through literary lenses. So we are looking for 5 examples of either gender, psychological, new critical, or classist lens in one of the two stories, either Gray Matter or Children of the Corn. And then you explain how this moment could change or shape the underlying meaning of the story, plot arc, or more closely, the individual character's arc. Explain the impact this moment has on you as a reader, your connection to the story's many themes, the overall mood of the story, so that's how it makes you feel, and the tone, how the author feels about the topic. So Stephen King goes on in a lot of his interviews to say that a lot of people feel that horror is kind of like the bottom of the barrel kind of writing, but it's usually the initial shock value of the story that makes them feel that way. After they reflect a little bit longer on the story, they might start to realize that the undertones of the story tend to have a much deeper meaning. So we are going to analyze that in this week's story options. We also have a discussion post about your story options. So whether you read Gray Matter or Children of the Corn, you're going to compare the monsters and the monster types in the stories read during week 9. So depending upon your story option, you're going to compare it to Graveyard Shift from Activity 1 and 2. Which monsters do you feel is superior as far as the monster goes? Explain your opinion using evidence from the story. And then comment on one other student's response discussing the central topic. We also should be reading 15 minutes a day, a silent reading option of your choice. So that means that it's something outside of the short story options and outside of Graveyard Shift for this week. And our silent reading reflection for this week is to research the author of your silent reading literature choice and make connections between the author's experiences and those described in your book of choice. So for example, as we read literature written by Stephen King, it should be known that he often draws from his own experiences. He uses his own memories, interests, and enjoyments in life to shape the environment for the plot of his stories. So, for example, Stephen King often uses the state of Maine as his inspiration for the setting of his stories for a variety of reasons, including that's where he grew up. If you want to know more about why he tends to use Maine in a large majority of his books and short stories, I would go and click on this link. It'll take you to a little bit of background about Stephen King and his writing. And then you are going to read and comment on one other student's post in a etiquette-appropriate manner. Alrighty guys, that is all the assignments for week 9. If you have any questions, please feel free to send me an email. I know several of you are working on completing missing assignments that can be found in the Schoology gradebook. It has little orange dots next to anything that would be marked as missing that can be completed before the end of the marking period, as we are rounding down towards the end of the marking period here. I appreciate that you are making up assignments that you are missing. Just be aware, it does take me a little bit of time, so I appreciate your patience as I go back through and grade things that you guys are completing. Alrighty, if you have any questions though, please feel free to send me an email, and I will talk to you guys later. Bye!